Welcome to Vineyard Hopkinton. As we follow Jesus together, we experience the Holy Spirit, create a multicultural community, and pursue Kingdom of God justice.
Well, I'll say it one more time. Happy Father's Day, guys. And happy Grandfather's Day, and happy Stepfather's Day, and happy General Good Guy Day, and maybe even happy Fun Uncle Day. We got any fun uncles in the room? Mark's throwing his hands up. He's owning it. I was once a fun uncle. Then I became a dad, and that ruined being a fun uncle. But I was once a fun uncle. Fun uncles is the greatest gig in the world, guys. Anybody know what I'm talking about? It's so nice. You get all the attention of kids when you actually want it, not when you don't. You get to choose to do fun things that you have actually chosen and hypothetically want to do with them versus what happens later on. You get to tell jokes and give candy and junk food without any repercussions. It is amazing. I was not fully prepared for what changed when I had kids of my own and all of the rules began to change. And all of a sudden I was forced to deal with the fact that if you give your kids candy after 3 a.m. the day before, that it's going to destroy them. I didn't know this. I didn't realize that how much that I couldn't do fun things because I had to adult and force them to go along with it. And the jokes. I used to like telling kids jokes. And then I had the jokes repeated to me over and over and over and over again, right? Anybody ever been there? There is a completely different set of rules when you become a dad. I love having fun uncles for my kids. I long for the day I can be it again. So I am not saying anything negative on fun uncles, but things changed and I have to learn how to change, right? In 1 Corinthians 11:1, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ." You know, since becoming a parent, I've learned the downside of that sort of a statement. Do as I do, except for what you just watched me do 15 minutes ago. Do as I do, except for what we're talking about that happened last night. Do as I do, except for where you just watched me sneak into the corner of the kitchen and grab all the chocolate chip cookies and try and eat them before you walked into the room, so I didn't have to give you one. Do as I do, except there's a million exceptions to this rule. One parenting lesson that I've had to learn, and I say this just as encouragement for others in the room who are like me in this, and it's something that I continue to learn, is that just because parenting is hard for me, which, to be honest, I am one of those in that category, where parenting has been a challenge for me to learn. It doesn't mean that I'm bad at it. It just means that it's going to take a lot more intentionality and work to get there. Anybody else willing to admit that you're in that same category with it? And of course, it's not just true with parenting, right? It's true with following Jesus too. Following the example of Jesus takes work. And honestly, I think often we don't even quite know what it's supposed to look like. And so we try and we guess a little bit, and I feel like everybody else guesses for us. When I was in high school and people found out that I was a Christian, you know what that meant? They didn't invite me to parties. That's just what it is. When, I was at a Red Sox game on Monday with Denoid Tucker, and we're sitting there, and the lady next to us was real chatty. And really, really chatty. And so she's talking to us about all the things. And she said, "So how do you guys know each other?" And we said, "Well, we go to church together." I didn't even drop the pastor bomb. She was not ready for that. She really was not ready for that one. I just said, Denoid said that we go to church together. And she spent the next 2 minutes apologizing for all of the language that she had just used while she said more words. that were just as bad as the ones that she had already used. I felt so bad for her. I wanted to be like, it's okay, you're fine. But you just couldn't stop the train that was rolling. When people hear that I'm a pastor, usually what they do is they hesitate to offer me a beer. They apologize for their language, and sometimes, very unfortunately, they ask me who I voted for. Is that what it really means to be a follower of Jesus? No. That is not what it actually fully means to be a follower of Jesus. But I think somehow we've kind of convinced ourselves maybe and others that following Jesus is about limiting our alcohol consumption, eliminating coarse language, and somehow, some way, who we vote for. But that's not really what it is. So if that's not what it is, then what does it actually look like to follow Jesus? What does that look like to others that are watching us? How do we live in a way that leaves us happy when we're imitated, not cringing because we're being imitated, right? So what I want to do is I want to look at first the verses that are right before 1 Corinthians 11:1 that I read. This is what it says. It ends chapter 10 this way. Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews, Greeks, or the church, even as I try to please everyone in every way. For I'm not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so they may be saved. And then he says, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. So, logic train here. Here's what he says. Don't cause somebody to stumble. And that's kind of where we get the morality clause, right? Don't live in these ways because that's going to cause somebody to stumble. And that's good and fine, but that's actually not the root of what Paul is trying to teach us here. That's just the first step. But don't cause somebody to stumble. And then seek the good of many that they may be saved. That's actually the core of what he's saying. What matters the most? That people come to know Jesus. That's the number one thing that he's getting at. We want people to know Jesus, and how we live helps them to see what it looks like to know Jesus. But how do we actually do that? And he says here, follow my example. Now, Paul's not saying I'm the dude, I'm amazing, so live like me. What Paul's saying is, you guys actually know me. We've lived together. I was in Corinth for a few years. We hung out. You saw how I lived. He's giving them an example and saying, if you need an example, here, use me. I'm trying. I'm intentional about it. This is how I think we should live. But what he follows with is actually the most important thing. Follow the example of Jesus. That's the goal. That's where he's wanting to get to. How do we follow the example of Jesus? I just want to say, as kind of we're getting going, that if you're here and you don't know Jesus, first off, we're really happy that you're here. And second off, I think that this is kind of the most important thing in this conversation of what it looks like to know Jesus. And so I think it's a really good space for you to be at. Because what I want to talk about this morning is what makes it so different from everything else around us, and how much good news that actually is. In Deuteronomy 6:6-7, it says, you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands that I'm giving you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you're at home and when you are on the road, when you're going to bed, and when you are getting up. Those verses are preceded by something called the Shema. It's probably the most quoted verse in Judaism. You've probably heard it, Deuteronomy 6:5, and you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. So when you read all this together, what's it say? That the focus of your entire life needs to be on God. The focus of everything. And if you're focused on God, then you know what you're going to naturally do? You're going to tell other people about God. Because you know what humans are really good at doing? Talking about the things that they're focused on. whether the other person wants to hear it or not. We are really good at that, right? Anybody heard any lectures from a guy on which tool to use or, and you've been like, yeah, that's wonderful. I need to turn away and talk about something else. Like, we love to talk about what we're really, really focused on in life. The people that Deuteronomy was written to were the Israelites, and they lived around people who worshiped other gods. Back in their time, I think I can make the statement that there were not people that called themselves atheists. Everybody believed in a God, and everybody actively sacrificed things to a God. Everyone. Lots of different types of gods, lots of different names, lots of different sacrifices, but everybody lived like that. It was the normal way to live. And so, for everybody around the Israelites, this is kind of their thought, was that like, if God can be included in my pantheistic worship, then I'm fine with him. But if not, then we're not talking. Like, don't tell me that there's only one God. I don't want to go down that path. And so what we see here is that the Israelites had to be really intentional about how they lived and about what they taught their kids, about the way that they taught their kids, if they wanted to pass on their faith to their children, because their kids were always going to be surrounded by people who didn't know who God was. And so if you didn't show them that he was the focus, if you didn't show them that he was the one that you loved and that you put all your attention on, if you didn't show them the ways to live that out, then you know what? They're not going to follow him. Because everybody else is doing something different, right? Why would you do something that even your parents don't want to live out? That would just make you weird and closed-minded. So what Deuteronomy is saying is this. If your kids aren't reminded of the truth of who God is, if they don't value the love of God, if they don't focus on God, then they're not going to choose to follow Jesus. Well, to follow God back in the day. They're just going to want to do what everyone else is doing, right? Have you ever had the what everybody else is doing conversation with somebody? Maybe with your kids? You know, I've had this conversation with my daughters multiple times. It starts with something like, Dad, why do you care so much if I'm singing those song lyrics on repeat? Or, Dad, why do you care so much if I watch this movie or that TV show? Or, Dad, all of my friends' parents let them have this on their phone and watch it all the time. Why do you care so much? Aren't they good parents too? They like to drop those sorts of ones. Those are fun. That you have to like sidestep like, hey, Dad, why does it matter? And then comes the inevitable when they get frustrated. But Dad, I just want to be like everybody else. And honestly, I feel empathy for my kids when that one comes out. Because it's true. Following the way of Jesus requires us to live differently and to look different from everybody else. And honestly, I struggle to say do as I do when it's just Stephen trying, kind of. If it's just Stephen kind of trying, I'm not sure that I actually want to say to anybody, do as I do, because that's going to be mediocre. But when I'm actually trying to follow Jesus, when I'm actually going all the way in, when I'm actually stepping all the way in it, I'm excited about it. Hey guys, follow me. Do as I do right now, because I know that it's going to be something that's going to change your life, that's going to be amazing, that's going to reorient you and fix the things that you feel are really hurt and broken, because I know it's going to be really, really good. So like, come on, let's go. I'm willing to invite somebody to look at me and to imitate me as I imitate Jesus. The difference is intentionality. Am I really trying to live like Jesus? So do as I do as I follow Jesus, focus on Jesus, and tell people what you're focused on. But you can't do any of that if you don't know what Jesus does, right? So let's talk about Jesus for a little bit. Mark 12, 13 through 17. I want to look at two encounters that he had. Later, the leaders sent the Pharisees and the supporters of Herod to trap Jesus into saying something for which he could be arrested. Teacher, they said, we know how honest you are. You're impartial and you don't play favorites. You teach the way of God truthfully. Now tell us, is there a right way to pay taxes to Caesar or not? There's no way that he thought that that's where they were going with that question, by the way. Tax time. Should we pay them or shouldn't we? Now Jesus saw through their hypocrisy and said, why are you trying to trap me? Show me a Roman coin and I'll tell you. So they handed it to him and he said, whose picture and title are stamped on it? Caesar's. Well then, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God. And his reply completely amazed them. You know, there's two groups of people that are questioning Jesus here. There's the Pharisees, who are the religiously conservative folks, and then there is the followers of Herod, who were the religiously liberal folks. They hated each other. Honestly, it is not a stretch to look at them and to see the same as our current political system reality in America. Democrats versus Republicans. There is no love in between these two groups. And so the only way that these two groups are going to join together in Jesus' time was by this one thing that Jesus pushed them towards. They were afraid of losing power. Their loss of power and control was the only thing that they felt like was big enough for them to unite in this. And so they said, we got to figure out a way to grab back what we're losing to him. And so they challenged Jesus in this strange way. They asked him about taxes. You guys can come and challenge me about taxes all the time, you know, and I'm going to say, go talk to an accountant. I have no idea. But Jesus was smart. He was really wise, and he shows his wisdom here. And this is why they asked him about this tax. It was a very specific tax. And it was a tax that was only given to countries that had been taken over by the Romans. Caesar implemented it and said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do a census. We're going to make you all come to a city where you don't live, and we're going to mark your name down, and we're going to take bunches of your money. And we're not going to do it to anyone who's a Roman citizen, only to the other folks. And so here it is. It's census time. Come on down. Come and pay us this money. The Israelites hated it because it was a constant reminder every time that it happened that they were not in control. And so for the room that Jesus was speaking to, if he said yes to this tax, it meant that every Israelite in the room would look at him like a traitor. If he said no to the tax, it meant that the Roman soldiers in the room were going to look at him and arrest him. There's no winning in this. Now, people often take these verses and use them to help us to think about how to talk about politics. But I don't think that that's actually the limit to what Jesus is talking about here. I don't think it just stops at politicians and presidents. I think what Jesus is getting at is he's making us look inside our heart and say, simply like, how much do you love power and control? What's going on in your own heart around that? Because what he's saying is that there's one who is above everything else, and that's God. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but give to God what is God's. Any good Jewish person in that room would have said, well, Jesus, that's a trick. Everything is God's. And he would have said, yeah, exactly. It's all his. So laws, court orders, taxes, follow them. until they contradict with what God has to say. And if something contradicts with God's commands, then you better make sure that you actually obey God. And this is what the disciples took from this sort of teaching and lived out. In Acts 4:19, Peter and John are on trial. And it says that then they called them in again and commanded them not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John said, "Which is right in God's eyes, to listen to him or to you? You be the judge. As for us, we cannot help speaking about what we have seen and heard." And then in Acts 5, they get called back into the court, and the court says to them, "We gave you orders not to teach in his name, yet you filled Jerusalem with his teaching and are determined to make us guilty of this man's blood." And Peter and the other apostles replied, "We must obey God rather than humans." Friends, what are you modeling when it comes to control and power to those around you? You know, I'll target this at the guys in the room especially, because I think this is big for us. What are you living out when it comes to being in control and being in power? Our culture rewards men who grab a hold of control and wrestle down power. Our culture glorifies men who do that. The way of Jesus is the complete opposite in many ways. The way of Jesus says that we need to trust in God instead of being in control. It says that we need to practice humility instead of grabbing for power. Are you willing to learn how to model trust and humility, even if it looks different from everybody else around you? I want to look at another encounter that Jesus had in Mark 12, in verse 41. This is what it says. Jesus sat down near the collection box in the temple and watched as the crowds dropped in their money. Many rich people put in large amounts. Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 small coins. And Jesus called his disciples to him and said, "I tell you the truth. This poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions. For they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on." Just real quick, let me say that the wealthy folks didn't do anything wrong. Jesus doesn't say that they did. In fact, I would say the wealthy folks did exactly what you should do. They probably gave 10%, which is what they should have done. 10% of what they had, or maybe some of them were even generous and they gave more than 10%. This isn't a critique of what they did at all. What it is a statement that what she did was extraordinary. If you look at it this way, think of a poor widow coming in with $10, 2 $5 bills. Following the law would say, take $1, get change for your 5 from somebody around you, take $1 and put it in. And that's good. That's what you're supposed to do. Being generous would say, I have 2 5s and I'm going to put 1 in. And I'm just going to keep the other one because, you never know what happens. But that's giving a lot, 50%. What this woman did was she took both and she put it in with a smile and didn't look back. Didn't do the grab, afraid, I just gave it all away. That was bad. I wonder if the priest can unlock the box so I can get in and take some of that back. She put it in, and then she kept going. She trusted, and it shocked Jesus. She lived in a way that surprised Jesus. Can you imagine that? Here's what she did. She lived in a way that required humility. She chose to be generous in a way that demonstrated trust. And she gave in a way that was sacrificial. Humility, trust, and sacrifice. And to that, Jesus didn't call all the disciples together and say, guys, come here. Go and be like her. It's not what he said. He said, guys, come here. Let me tell you. I was sitting here, and all these wealthy folks came by, and they gave the right amount. Some of them, you would be shocked at how much money they gave. It was really good. And then this poor woman came up, and she took everything she had, and she gave it. Can you imagine how much she must trust God to provide for everything she needs? Can you imagine living in that sort of a way? And then they just kind of moved on. Can you imagine living in a way that shocks Jesus? Let me tell you two stories of people, and then we'll end. The first is a woman named Annette. She was a part of the church that I grew up in. Her and her family moved onto the house that was on the church property, I think when I was like early teens. And she had kids that were my age. It was kind of a his and hers and theirs situation. So they had like 6 kids. They all lived there for a long time. And their kids grew up there. About 5 to 10 years, I can't really place it exactly, after they started going to the church, and kind of their rental agreement was that they would clean the church in exchange for being able to live there rent-free. 5 to 10 years later, her husband decides to leave, and he's gone. So now she's single mom in this house doing life with lots of kids. And you know what Annette did? She stayed. She kept cleaning the church as payment for rent. She loved her kids really well. They're super loyal to her. She started leading the nursery because she wanted to make sure that she was more invested in the community that she was a part of. She went actually a lot deeper in her relationships at the church after this. She trusted God and she was humble. And I think Jesus looks at her life and marvels at how she's living. There's a guy at a church in Connecticut that Sarah and I pastored like 10 years ago. His name's Paul. He worked in Manhattan as in finance. We lived in the Connecticut suburbs of New York City. And he made a lot of money. He had a very high job. And Paul always made sure to prioritize his family. And it was really obvious. He is just the kind of boundaries that he placed. His kids would tell us about it, that even with the commute in and out of Manhattan, he was at their stuff. Him and his wife had a great relationship, and everybody could tell. They hosted a small group. They were just involved in life. About several years after we left the church, they started going to a different church, and he ended up getting asked by the pastors of that church to take over as kind of a CFO, chief operating officer for the church, which is a significant pay cut, guaranteed. Like, no church is paying anywhere close to Manhattan finance numbers. And Paul said yes. He still had a kid at home. They were still paying for college for another kid. And they live in an area that costs even more than what we pay here. It was very expensive. But he said yes because he trusted God. And I think Jesus looks at Paul's life and marvels at how he lives. Friends, living like Jesus requires us to live differently from those around us, but it is worth it. And I think living a way that looks like Jesus rejects control and power and welcomes trust and humility. It says that we're going to choose to live sacrificially and generously. And we're going to allow that to build within us trust and obedience because we know who it is that we're following. And we want to look like him.